no one really comes to nervous system work through choice, or very few people. I think the majority of people who land on nervous system work are struggling in some way, shape or form, and that was very much my introduction to nervous system regulation. And whilst it was really difficult at the time, I've learned so much about myself that I would like to share here, and also it's now a huge part of the work that I do. So every cloud and all that, I'm here in Salt Hill, actually where I launched Ciorcal 6 months ago. So it's a bit of a full circle moment to be back here. Welcome to Ciorcal Conversations, unscripted, grounded, out in nature. As I said, today we're going to look at 3 signs that your nervous system is overloaded. But before we go into those 3 main signs, just a brief overview of what the nervous system is. So at its core, the nervous system is our safety mechanism. It's constantly in interaction with the world around us, picking up on if we're safe or if we're in threat. So that's its function. That's where we begin with it. When we break it down a little bit more, if we imagine the nervous system as here and breaking it out into 2 branches, your central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. Your peripheral nervous system consists of 2 more subsystems called the somatic nervous system, and for the purpose of this podcast today, we're going to look at the autonomic nervous system, which controls involuntary function in the body. So things like digestion, things like heart rate, things like the breath, which we'll touch on in another couple of minutes. And then within the autonomic system, the terms that you might be familiar with already if you've touched on a little bit of nervous system work before are fight or flight, which is that like activating sympathetic energy, and rest and digest, which is parasympathetic, it's calming. And through the breath and through many other different means, we work between those states. That's actually an older way of looking at nervous system regulation, those like 2 different modes, fight or flight being one, rest and digest being another. There's a lot of newer theories, and I stress the word theory because there is so much that we don't know about the body still, like so much that we're constantly learning. But some of the newer theories help us to paint a clearer picture of what's actually happening in our bodies, which is very important in terms of understanding how we might be overloaded. And there's a newer theory called polyvagal theory, which helps paint a clearer picture of what's actually happening in our body in terms of that safety versus threat response. And the picture that paints is that there's actually 3 different states that we can find ourselves in around feeling safe, feeling social, feeling connected in our bodies. The first one is ventral vagal, which is our rest and digest. Think of it as the green state, where we're in connection with others, we feel ourselves, the mind is quiet, the body is feeling its feelings. That's ventral vagal. The middle state, if we think about it as orange on a traffic light system, so we had green, orange might be referred to as sympathetic. So that's our fight or flight response. It's a very activated response because if we're in danger, if we sense a threat, we either fight or we get out of there. Both of those require a lot of energy. So it's not inherently bad to be in that state. If we're going to the gym, for example, we need that sympathetic energy to push ourselves. If we're in danger, it makes sense for us to get out of there. It's helpful. But the difficulty can come when we get stuck in that state, in a chronic sympathetic response, which I'll touch on in a couple of minutes in terms of those 3 pieces that I'll discuss. So that's our orange. And then our red, through the lens of polyvagal theory, can be referred to as dorsal vagal shutdown. So the 2 words that we would associate with that state are freeze or fawn. Freeze meaning we, exactly what it says in the tin, we freeze, we tend to shut down, or we fawn, we tend to, in the context maybe of people pleasing, keep others around us happy at the expense of ourselves to stay in connection. understanding those states, whilst it's not a perfect model for understanding the nervous system, can be really helpful if you're coming to this work, because it helps us to start to map what's happening for us internally. We would ultimately like to be in the green as much as possible, that rest and digest, feeling safe, feeling social. Other people have a big part to play in that too, being around others, our tribe, who we feel safe and in connection with. But also we'd like to be able to get into that orange energy, that sympathetic energy, to take action on things. And remember, our nervous system's main role is to keep us safe. So even being in the red is a safety response. If we think about what happens when we freeze, if we look at the animal kingdom, zebras, for example, will play dead when they're in danger to ward off predators. So the predator will come along, think that the zebra is dead, and they will freeze. They'll stay where they are, and then when the predator leaves, they'll start to come back to themselves again. So all of these different states are ways of us staying safe. Now, I mentioned earlier that the difficulty can come when we get stuck in one or more of these states. And through the lens of today's podcast, which is 3 signs that your nervous system is overloaded, I want to explore them through those different states. The first sign that your nervous system is likely overloaded is overthinking or rumination, being stuck in your mind. And a nice frame for that is overthinking can often be underfeeling. So the vagus nerve, which sits at the back of our heads here, is the main nerve of the parasympathetic nervous system, so our rest and digest system. Why that's important is it connects the brain to many different organs and muscles in the body, like our gut, our heart, our lungs. And what's interesting about that in the context of overthinking is that there's messages being constantly sent from the mind to the body and the body of the mind. But around 70 to 80% of those messages are actually being sent from the body up into the mind. So a lot of us, there's the misconception, think, and I was very much in this camp before I came to this work, think that stress is in the mind, that our mind is racing and all of the stress is up here, and that's where we try to change our thoughts or use positive affirmations in the morning, and that can be really helpful. But for me, it worked until it didn't work. And what I've learned since is that around 70 to 80% of the messages are actually coming from the body to the mind. Our body is scanning for a sense of safety and a sense of danger, and it's sending these messages up into the mind. And the mind is interpreting that information and creating scenarios off the back of that. So if we don't feel safe to feel in our body, I mentioned overthinking as underfeeling, if there isn't a sense of safety down here, we will pull ourselves up into our mind to try and create safety up here, to try and find solutions, to try and find answers. The difficulty can come with that when we can't find certainty up here. It's very difficult for us to find certainty to the problems that we tend to ruminate over. We could ruminate over conversations that we've had with people in the past that didn't really go our way, or worries about the future, or not being able to switch off. And what's happening here is the mind is trying to find answers for things that the body hasn't processed. Where the breath comes in here is firstly by creating a sense of safety in the body. And by the way, it's not just the breath that can help us with this. If we think about what it means to be in this green state, our ventral vagal state in terms of nervous system regulation, time in connection with others is a big piece. Time in nature is also a huge piece. One of the best things about the breath is that it's within us. We have this tool in real time to help come back into the green. And in the context of overthinking, if we can start to calm and bring safety in here, what tends to happen is the mind quietens up here. You may have heard me use the phrase story follows state before. And what that means is that the stories that we tell ourselves in our mind follow the state of our body, the state of our nervous system. Where we begin there with the breath is simply by extending our exhale. So if we think about breathing in for 4 and out for 6, that brings a sense of safety into the body. Our autonomic nervous system picks up on this, sends this message of safety up into the mind, and suddenly our thoughts start to quieten. We don't feel as busy up here anymore. Another great way of bringing calm into the body is simply by breathing in and out through your nose. Nasal breathing is tied into parasympathetic activation. So to bring a sense of calm, breathing through our nose, extending the exhale. And then a third layer of that is these down-regulating breath practices. So I have an insight timer, for example, with lots of different down-regulating practices like coherent breathing, 4-7-8 breath, yoga nidra. All of these help us to move into that green state, a state of calm in our bodies, and suddenly the overthinking starts to settle. And I have experienced this time and time again. Working for myself has been the most stressful thing that I have ever done, and I'm constantly getting pulled into sympathetic activation, which is great for getting things done. But what can happen is that energy gets held up in the mind and it leads to rumination, overthinking. What if things don't work out? What if I don't make enough money? And my go-to in terms of in that moment to downregulate is the breath. It's coherent breathing, it's in and out through the nose, it's longer exhales to help shift my state. If you do find that your mind is very busy, the frame around working with the body to bring regulation and safety here is an absolute game changer for people. I work in this space with people every day who come back to me and say that without trying to change their thoughts, by actually working with the body, their mind has become quieter, especially around sleep, because we all know the difficulty that sleeping poorly brings in terms of our lack of energy throughout the day, the mind feeling groggy, the mind feeling busy, but the body feeling tired. If we can improve our sense of grounding and safety in the body through the breath, through sleep, we can start to quieten the mind. The second sign that your nervous system is likely overloaded is emotional numbness. So feeling very flat, having no motivation, feeling disconnected from emotion. These are all things that I really struggled with over the last couple of years. And if we think about it through that lens of that traffic light system again, if we stay in stress for long enough, that sympathetic activation, the orange, where our bodies constantly feel unsafe and there's this anxiety that just hangs around. If we get stuck in that for long enough, we'll likely start to tip into the red, which is disconnection, numbness, feeling flat. And if we look at that through the lens of disconnection from emotion, if our bodies don't feel safe to actually feel and be with our feelings, which is not an easy thing to do, it can be quite confronting to experience anger, experience sadness, experience grief. But if our body doesn't feel safe to actually feel those feelings, we will tend to disconnect from them. And one of the key pieces within that is if we can't be with those emotions that are more difficult to be with, we actually shut ourselves off from the emotions that we want to feel more of, like excitement, like joy. If we think about the spectrum of emotion, to be able to feel the positive emotions, we need to be with the emotions that maybe we're not that comfortable sitting with. And if for long enough we stay in this sympathetic activation where it's this constant low level of anxiety without actually being able to feel our emotions, which are held in the body, our nervous system will eventually just tip us into the red, and we'll stay there for as long as we're not willing to actually feel our feelings. That was very much my experience for a couple of years there. I was so disconnected from what was happening from the neck down. The intensity of emotion, I felt like I had no outlet for it, for the sadness, the loneliness, the anger that I was feeling. And as a way of protecting myself from that, my nervous system just kind of shut things down. And when the nervous system shuts things down, we spend most of our time up here. If we think about being disconnected from down here, we'll spend the majority of our time up here. And coming back to feeling was a big part of my journey. If we think about then how we can work through that emotional numbness, again, the breath is such a powerful tool here, because I mentioned earlier that emotion is stored in the body. If we think about emotion as energy in motion, emotions are made up of energy. And if we feel an emotion rising, to me that's energy rising in the body. If we feel sadness coming through, that's energy rising in the body. If we feel safe in our bodies to cry those tears, then we will allow that energy to move and it'll pass through and we'll come back to balance. That's healthy expression. That's healthy signs of nervous system regulation. But if we don't feel safe to feel those feelings, they don't just go away. They get held and stuck in the body, and to disassociate from them, because they're difficult to be with, the nervous system will move into the red and it will shut us down. So the work becomes starting to open back up to emotion, which we can do through the breath. The style that I facilitate in my one-to-ones and groups is conscious connected breathwork. And conscious connected breathwork is an incredibly powerful tool to allow that emotion to rise up in the body, to actually feel the feelings that for so long have been left unfelt. The inability to feel those feelings is what has pushed us into that red. And by the way, if we come back to the nervous system at its core as a way to keep us safe, sometimes it is safest for us not to feel our feelings because the intensity of them can be too much. If we think about grief, for example, grief is an incredibly powerful and debilitating emotion. And if it's too intense for you to be with, you will push it away. Again, that's a safety strategy because in your body, in your mind, if you allowed that grief to come in fully, then you don't know how you would be. So it makes sense in a way that to keep ourselves safe and protected, we will push that down. But eventually, too much of that pushing down leads to emotional numbness. And that's where we find ourselves in this like apathetic state, potentially depressive state. If we think about to express our emotion and the opposite of that, to depress, which Gabor Mate speaks about a lot, that depression or suppression of emotion leads to this emotional numbness. And it's a very clear sign that your nervous system is overloaded. A couple of gentle steps back for you to help support you if you feel that way is to start with down-regulating breath work and just starting to allow that feeling to start to come back. If you're thinking about conscious connected breath work, I would advise getting in contact with a facilitator because it's very important that if you start to do deeper forms of breath work, that emotion that comes to the surface for you is held in the right way by a facilitator who's experienced, who has gone to those depths in themselves. Because allowing that energy to move can be a very confronting experience for people. It's a very worthwhile experience, like it has been a huge part of my journey to actually allow those feelings to rise again, but it needed to be in the presence of others who I felt safe around. That's why one-to-one work, group work, in the context of conscious connected breath work, it's so important that it's held in the right way. The third sign that your nervous system is potentially overwhelmed is people pleasing. Now, that might take you a minute to put those together, but in the context of people pleasing, if we go back to the terms that we use to describe the different states of the nervous system, we might think of the green as rest and digest. We might think of the orange as fight or flight. If we think about the red, the terms that we tend to associate with the red are freeze, which I discussed earlier, or fawn. Fawn is very important in the context of people pleasing because if we look at the nervous system through the lens of staying safe, in a lot of contexts, it's safer for us to keep the people around us happy than to fully be ourselves. I'm going to say that again. It's safer for us to keep the people around us happy, to fawn to them, to please them at the expense of ourselves, than to fully be ourselves. It's a safety strategy. And it's a learned behavior over usually years and years, tends to start in childhood and continues through teens and throughout our life as a way to stay in connection with others, because fundamentally we will find ways to stay in connection. We are social beings. If you think about our evolution, the way that we formed as humans in tribes, everyone had their place, felt that sense of connection, which is deeply regulating for our nervous system. And in the world that we live in now, it's safer in a lot of cases to be somebody else, to stay in connection, than to actually be our full selves. And in the context of people pleasing, that might look like not setting boundaries that you believe in because you want to keep others happy, not saying how you actually feel, finding yourself in groups of people where you don't necessarily agree or feel close to them, but it still feels safer for you than being on your own. And the reason why that pushes us into the red is because we know deep down that we're not fully in tune with who we want to be and how we want to show up in this world. And that is incredibly draining. Over the course of my 20s, that has been the biggest energy drain for me, is thinking that I needed to show up in certain ways based on all of the explicit and implicit messages that I picked up from the world around me. So be masculine, be in good shape, be attractive, boys don't cry, you're not allowed to get angry. All of these different messages that we pick up on along the way that keep others around us happy, but don't necessarily align with who we want to be. And maybe that's starting to make more sense to you now in the context of nervous system regulation. And if we think about our way to move out of that sense of nervous system overload in the context of people pleasing, coming back to the green in that way means coming back to our authentic selves, the person that we are underneath the pleasing of others. And that's a journey. That's a journey that everyone is on in some way, shape, or form. And for me, the more I denied that in myself, the more disconnected I became from myself. And the work has been coming back to who I am beneath all of those messages I've picked up, who I want to be in my day-to-day, the people I want to spend time with, the things that I want to do, the work that I want to do. And a lot of that has come through the breath again. I'm not saying the breath is the answer to all of life's problems, but in the context of people pleasing, when we breathe in a conscious, connected way, all of these insights start to come to the surface about who we are underneath all that bullshit, for want of a better term. It creates space for us to actually tune into what we want. And in that space lies choice. Because if you don't feel like you have a choice, you will keep reverting to the safety of people pleasing. But if you feel like you have a choice, the choice to choose who you want to be, to wear the clothes you want to wear, to say the things you want to say, to do the things you want to do, you will start to create a life that feels authentic to you. That to me is one of the biggest pain points, struggles of my generation, of people older than me, of people younger than me. I have conversations about this nearly every day, about people who are struggling to be themselves. The phrase find yourself gets thrown around a lot. I want to find myself. To me, it's less about finding yourself and it's more about returning to yourself, who you were when you were young, this expressive being that said what they wanted to say, did what they wanted to do. That's a journey back to yourself, back to authentic expression. And in terms of nervous system regulation, it is incredibly energizing, it's incredibly healing to come back to that part of you, the authentic self, freedom of expression, as a way of shifting out of the chronic nervous system dysfunction that you may find yourself in. Because one of the biggest themes of nervous system regulation is connection with others. But if you're connecting with people at the expense of yourself, if you're keeping people happy at the expense of how you really feel, that's not true connection. And you will suffer in terms of your energy levels, in terms of your ability to regulate, in terms of the overthinking you experience, the further you distance yourself from authentic expression. I'm not saying that that's an easy journey to go on. There's a frame for this called the hero's journey, and it involves a lot of fear and stepping into that fear, meeting a mentor along the way, entering the cave, which is the darkest place in your journey, and eventually coming back to exactly where you started. But you're not coming back as the same person. You're coming back as this completely new person, this new way of being, and all of these gifts that you can bring to the people around you. That's a frame from a guy called Joseph Campbell. And it's been a really powerful frame for me over the years to give context to this struggle that I've felt inside trying to be my authentic self. But ultimately, if you are struggling with people pleasing, seeing it as a strategy to stay safe is the first step, because it brings awareness to where you're at, and what you're aware of, you're in control of. A quote from Anthony DeMello, a spiritual teacher. That awareness can help you start moving forward with it through the breath, through showing up more authentically. And suddenly that energy will start to lift. You'll start to find yourself in the green a little bit more. And when you think about what life looks like through that lens of feeding into yourself more, it's more optimistic, it's more open, there's more growth, there's more people that come into your life that are actually aligned with you. This is the work. Probably a bit of a tangent there, but I feel like it's a really important one to mention in terms of nervous system regulation that probably doesn't get talked about enough. We talk about the tools, we talk about the practices, but people pleasing and nervous system regulation, they're incredibly closely linked. And I see this pattern come up a lot with the people that I work with. I saw it in myself. Those three in particular, the overthinking, the emotional numbness and the people pleasing, those are nervous system issues that you can bring awareness to and work through to increase your energy levels, to feel your feelings, to add a richness and more meaning and more expression to your life. I want to finish by posing a question to you. Oftentimes there can be a lot of judgment around these things that we struggle with, around the overthinking, around the people pleasing. My question for you is, what might your life look like if you brought a little more curiosity instead of judgment to these ways of staying safe? If you brought curiosity to the overthinking and asked yourself, I wonder, why am I doing that? Why does that keep me safe? What's it protecting me from? And maybe, how can I step past that now through my understanding of it in the context of people pleasing? Why have I found myself keeping others happy at the expense of myself? Again, is it a safety thing? Does it just feel safer for me? And now that I have that awareness, how can I maybe notice that and start to lean into who I am more, my authentic self, the things that I want to say, the person I want to be, and just be curious with it. Because when you're in that energy of curiosity, that's the place where change starts to come from. There's a coach in America, Joe Hudson, that speaks a lot about experiments, running experiments in your day, in your week, to see can you make subtle changes. And that's coming from a place of curiosity. In the context of people pleasing, you might run the experiment of having 3 conversations with people where you show up as unapologetically yourself in a week and reflect on them and see how that felt. Notice the subtle energy lift that came from that instead of just saying what you thought the other person needed to hear. Maybe doing one activity in a week that feels more you than things that you've done before. It might be making a video for social media. It might be painting a picture. It might be going to a music lesson. It might be going for a solo swim. Bringing that energy of curiosity to the people pleasing, to the emotional numbness, starting to tune into your body more without shame, without criticism, and just noticing what starts to come to the surface. Bringing curiosity is a really powerful way of starting to meet these nervous system strategies that you might have used for so long to stay safe in this world. If you'd like to go a little bit deeper on this, feel free to reach out through message on Instagram or by dropping me an email. I have conversations like this every day with people who want to bring more curiosity to the ways that they've stayed safe in this world up until this point. I'm more than happy for us to chat about it. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to like it, share it with a friend potentially. If you think that it would help someone, send it on and let me know your feedback. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great day or evening. Chat soon. Owen.